Noah is quite a character.
Cool.
Arms are going to be so sore tomorrow. We did push-ups and sit-ups this morning in the lab. Right. Oh, this is going to be bad tomorrow. I'm going to...
Your chest.
Nathan. Morgan, Nathan. Danny Allen. Oh. Kenya. Kota. Jonathan. You get it? Got the one there? Julian. Damien. I met your roommate yesterday.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. I was walking out and I heard this accent like, oh, that sounds so nice. I turned around like, wow, never saw him before. It was nice to hear an accent from Jacob. Ali. Trey. Yes, right there. Zach. Chase. Nathan. All right, so question.
Next time. Tenemos que escribir una pregunta.
All right, so question is, what do you expect to happen to the developmental sequence if I change throwing for force to throwing for accuracy? Right, so what do we see happen on the developmental sequence when I change the task from force to accuracy?
Is this one of those 2 tries?
Yes, it is. 2 points if you get it now, 1 point if you can get it at the end of the class.
Can you repeat it one more time?
Sure. What do you expect to happen with the developmental sequence if you ask someone to throw for accuracy rather than throwing for force? So I changed the task constraint from force to accuracy. What happens to the developmental sequence? Okay, pass those forwards, make sure you've got your name and the number 1 on it. And then we'll have another go at the end. Alright, so at the end of class, don't forget to put your binder in the crate, okay, so that I can check off that those were on time. And I was looking through the schedule. On chapter 8, remember I said the other, what day is today? Today's Thursday, so on Tuesday I said that the rules for ballistic skills are pretty similar across the skills. I'm projecting an object by kicking it, heading it, throwing it. So we're going to finish off throwing and then jump the rest of the skills. You guys need to make sure that you look at those when you're studying from the chapter, because chapter 9, when we're looking at manipulative skills, there's a lot more detail and technical stuff that I want to make sure you understand from chapter 9. So I want to spend the time on chapter 9 rather than spending the time on the skills that really the concept of the skill doesn't change when we're looking at ballistic skills. So, throwing for accuracy then. I changed the task from throwing for force to throwing for accuracy. So instead of throwing as hard as I can at the target on the playground, we say to the kids, I want you to hit the number 2. Okay? So, when we throw for force, when we're looking at our developmental sequence at our MSU chart, for example, is the easiest one to consider. Right? What I'm looking for is step in opposition, backswing, and some follow through. Alright? Technically, that's the most useful type of throwing in most sports skills. Right? I want to be able to throw the ball long and hard somewhere. Okay? When I ask someone to throw for accuracy, then what we typically see, and it wouldn't matter if I asked you, even if you're really good at throwing, right? We would, and if we filmed it, we would probably see some change. But if you ask someone who's not very good at throwing, you have to hit that door handle, right? And we just told them to hit the door as hard as possible. What do you think I might do if you say it doesn't matter what you do except you have to hit the door handle?
The power change, like.
The power would change, right? What might I do when I'm changing the power? Am I going to throw from here? Right? So, first thing I'm going to do is here. Am I going to do a great big backswing? No, because I've got to hit that, right? So, I might do this. Because the goal is I have to hit the handle. So what am I doing? What stage am I doing now? Right? 1, 2, 3. Right? So when we change the task to accuracy, we generally see some backtracking. Right? We see the developmental sequence go down. We go back on the sequence to something that was simpler. Right? Something that's lower down in the development of the skill. From a sport perspective then, if I'm coaching a sport where throwing is important, we've got a bit of a dilemma now, because very often in the game, I've got to combine the two, right? It's great if my quarterback can throw. Is that the right person that throws the ball?
Yes.
Yes! All right, it's great if my... That's a good step for me, I got that right. It's great if my quarterback can throw really, really hard, right? But if he doesn't throw it where I need it to go, that doesn't help the team very much, right? Same baseball, softball. It's great if my outfielder, that's what they call in cricket, I'm not sure what they are in baseball and softball, but whoever it is that's all the way out there, right? Great if they can throw the ball really, really hard, but if it doesn't get to the person on base, that's not very useful, right? So now we've got this dilemma, we've got this trade-off, because when I'm coaching this throwing skill, I've got to say, well, I don't only want force, I need some accuracy. The ball has to go where I want the ball to go. Right? So I have to be willing to accept possibly a slightly less mechanically correct skill if I'm going to tell them they have to hit the spot. Because the literature tells us that we can't do the accuracy with the same biomechanics. That takes heaps and heaps of practice, and even then, generally what you see is a little bit of change. So if you say you've got to hit that person, the ball has to go there, you're going to see a slight change in their backswing. Or the length of the step they take may change, right? If we're talking to a beginner, you're going to see dramatic change in their developmental sequence if you change that task, right? If I'm playing with a professional person and I film them and I can analyze it mechanically with some good equipment, then probably the amount of force that they push on their foot, or the length of the step, or the amount of trunk rotation. Something is going to change when I make them add in the accuracy to the force. Okay? So when I'm coaching that, particularly if you're working with a little league group or a high school football group, right? Kids who are younger that have less experience, how am I going to phrase and what am I going to expect when I change the task? Right? So you've got to be open to the idea that what you see might alter a little bit once you start adding that accuracy in to throw it as hard as you can. When we're on the playground then, since what we are wanting is a step in opposition and a backswing, because for basic throwing that's important. When we're on the playground, we've got to be really, really careful not to tell them to hit something specific, right? Just throw as hard as you can at the target. They're going to quite willingly say, well, I want to get it in that number, right? But if you've got someone that is already throwing well, and there are a couple of them out there that throw quite well, some of the older ones, right? If I've got someone that's throwing quite well, then I can say, okay, well, they're already stepping in opposition 95% of the time I watch them throw. So then they're going to step in opposition. Now then, maybe I'll start introducing accuracy. But if I have a kid that's picking up the beanbag and doing this, don't tell them to hit a number on the target, because now they're going to do that. And that doesn't help us get a step in opposition and a backswing, right? So you've got to start paying attention to what actual cues and feedback and encouragement you're giving, because you could make the skill go backwards instead of moving forwards, which is what we're looking for. Okay? All right, remember then that from pretty early on, we start to see the girls throwing way with much poorer form than the boys. So if you're working with one of the girls at a throwing station on the playground, you really want to be encouraging, how are you going to get them to step in opposition? Keep modeling it. Maybe put something for them to step on, or tie something around their ankles and get them to step with that foot. Right? How are you going to encourage? Because the girls always lag behind. And there is no physiological reason at the age that we're working with for the girls to lag behind. They are not weaker than the boys at 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Right? Until we get to puberty, there's no reason for the girls to throw more poorly, and yet they do. Right? And it's totally environmental. It's because Dad doesn't play ball with the girl in the garden, he plays ball with the boy in the garden. Or the girl watches gymnastics or ballet or ice skating on the telly, and the boys are watching football and baseball and right? It's purely environmental. So if we can change that, we might start to see some progression later down the line. Right? The girls who throw in the classroom, you girls should be thinking, well, what happened? How come I throw? Right? Because you're very, very unusual. So why do I throw? What happened way, way back that I throw? Because most girls don't throw. Okay? All right, so we've got kicking, we have film of kicking, I think there's punting in the, I had already taken, oh no, we've got punting. I think we have striking, yes. And the striking is typically, the research is on sidearm, like a tennis forehand, possibly a baseball, or an overarm. So a serve in tennis, or a volleyball serve, or a spike, right? That's where the research is. We don't have a lot of research on cricket type striking, golf type striking, right? Which is a shame, because as an adult, The striking skills we do have tennis with older adults, but a lot of older adults play golf, but we have very little research on what that looks like and what we should expect it to do. Keep going. Okay, so assessment then. When I'm looking at assessing, remember that your developmental sequences, whether you're using your MSU chart, whether you choose to use this component approach that these chapters introduce us to, that you can use those as a checklist. This person is here. What I expect to happen next is this. And so this would be an appropriate cue to give that person, right? If they are a stage 1 or a stage 2, and you are giving them cues to try to make them look like a stage 4 or a stage 5, that's inappropriate teaching, because we know they can't look like a stage 5 if they're a stage 2. They've got to go through the other steps first. So you're going to get frustrated because you're not going to get what you want, and they're going to get frustrated because they're going to know you're not happy with it. Okay. If you're using a total body approach to assessment in particular, then how do I grade? Right, we've already seen who was on the playground with me Wednesday. At the throwing target on Wednesday, one of the, actually I think it may have been Audrey, one of the new little girls, was really interesting because she stepped, which is stage 3, and she did that with her arm, which is stage 2. So if I'm scoring that, how do I score that? If it's me, personally, I would score it 2.5 and hope that I can change this arm action, right? But it was, I've never seen that before. It was really interesting. She was doing that. We're like, that's really very interesting to watch. I've been teaching this age group for 30 plus years. I've never seen that. So, very interesting. So if you're looking at trying to grade someone on a TGMD, or if you're looking at your component approach, right? The majority of times you see it, do they do that thing? Yes or no? Right? Or if I have 5 characteristics in order to put them in a particular stage on the MSU chart, and they're doing 4 of them, I would put them in that stage. Right? So you have to use your judgment. Means you've got to be careful if you're co-teaching. Right? You both have to decide to agree on what is acceptable. Okay? Because if you say they're doing 4 out of 5, that means they don't get that stage, I'm putting them down 1. And the other teacher says they're doing 4 out of 5, that means they get that stage, then you guys are out of sync and you're giving mixed messages to the parents or the child, or, right? Observation needs to be conducted from the appropriate direction. Remember, you want to be 90 degrees to the plane of motion that you're interested in. Right? So, if I am watching something from the back, then what I'm assessing should be a movement that is occurring in the plane. So if I'm watching the backswing, then I may want to watch the backswing from the front or the back and see what's happening. Right? What is it you're interested in looking at? Which plane of motion are you looking at? And you have to be 90 degrees to the plane of motion. 2 cameras, if you can afford 2 cameras. Right? Very useful to have 2 cameras. Because 1 camera only gives you 1 plane of motion. Okay? Okay, so of your heads. I know I've skipped a lot of the skills, and you do need to go and look at those skills, but the thing about ballistic skills is mechanically, they're all very similar. I mean, the goal is to project an object. I have to apply force to the object. What biomechanical laws improve force application to an object? Okay? So just be thinking along those lines as you look at the rest of the skills. Remember, on Tuesday next week we have a review session. So if you have a question on any of the other skills or the developmental sequence for one of the other skills, bring it on Tuesday so that I can address it for you. Okay. All right. All right. Manipulative skills then. So we're still looking at an object control. So if we're looking at a basic characterization, we would have locomotor and object control. Right? Ballistic and manipulative skills are both object control skills, but manipulative skills have some interesting properties that we don't see in quite the same way when we're looking at ballistic development. Right. So manipulative skill, we tend to immediately think of something we're doing with our hands. They don't all have to be dribbling in soccer, would be considered a manipulative skill. Right? But most of the ones that we think about are things to do with our hands. They are typically fine motor skills, not gross motor skills, although not always, or a portion of them are fine motor skills. So catching counts as a manipulative skill. Right? Catching is a gross motor skill, but to catch a ball I have to close my hands around the ball with my fingers. And moving my fingers is a fine motor skill, right? So some of these skills are kind of a mix. What makes humans unique in being able to perform some of the manipulative skills we can do? Why are we different than most other? Do I have a thumb? Because quite a lot of other creatures have thumbs, but I can move my thumb separately from the rest of my fingers and my hand. Right? So we have an opposable thumb, and there's not a lot of opposable thumbs out there. Right? So that gives us a massive advantage once we start looking at manipulative skills, and depending upon the approach you take, the philosophy you take, a lot of researchers say a manipulative thumb is the thing that put us higher up the scale of development, because we are able to do things that others can't. Other things manipulate objects, right? Birds will manipulate objects with their beak. Birds will pick up a stone and throw it on a seed to crack a seed. That's manipulation, right? But it's not at the level we can do it. So, structural constraints. So if I've got arthritis in my thumb, then my ability to do manipulative skills at a high level may be severely impaired. So, grasping is the first one we look at. As an adult, reaching and grasping tend to be one skill. So, if I'm going to pick this up, I pick it up, right? But, to pick it up, I had have to reach for it, and then I have to do something with my hand to grasp it. So reaching and grasping, when we look at infants and toddlers, even preschoolers, and then when we look at an elderly population, tend to be two separate skills. It's just that we get so good at them that they blend, they merge into one skill when we look at that kind of middle population then. So prehension is the fancy term for grasping. Okay? And back in the 1930s, we had a researcher who looked a lot at grasping in children. And she came up with these 10 phases of grasping that we see. So a developmental sequence that has 10 portions to it for grasping. And her sequence transitions from what we call a power grasp to a precision grasp. Right? So we'll come back to that in a minute because we've got a diagram. And what we find is, this is a long, long time ago, right? What we find in the more recent research is that actually her sequence holds very true. We see some changes in the timing of it. And one of the limitations of her research was that she gave all the children a 1-inch red cube. Right? So if you give a 2-month-old a 1-inch red cube, remember, what's this? Right? If I'm going from the midline out, what developmental law is that? Proximo-distal, right? So at 2 months old, at 3 months old, I don't have very much control over my fingers. I'm flapping my hands around, right? But I can't move my fingers. So if I give a 2 or 3 month old a 1-inch cube, then what I see happen is not the same that I see happen if I give a 3-year-old a 1-inch cube, right? So one of the limitations when we look at what Halverson said is that it wasn't developmentally appropriate to give a 2-month-old that cube, right? But the sequence holds true. Okay. So, we have a power grasp. So what we find is when you watch a very young child try to pick something up, right? They'll put their whole hand down on the object in order to pick it up. Right? So they use the palm of their hand and then they wrap as many of their fingers as they've got control over. So we call that a power grasp. Because they're using way too many muscles to achieve that skill. The second thing we see happen is that they'll start to come at the side of the object to try to pick it up. Right? Then we'll see them start to change the thumb position to the finger position. Then we start to see them use their fingers. The other interesting thing to watch for is, do they have to have their elbow supported, or are they able to pick it up without their elbow being supported? Eventually, we're going to get to what we call a pincer grasp, just my finger and thumb. So I start here, power grasp, I go to a precision, highly precise, I'm able to pick up a raisin, right? It's one of the reasons why Cheerios and raisins are great food for young children because it makes them practice, right? Well, they do, right? If you give a 2-month-old a bowl of Cheerios, it's going to be all over the floor because they grab great big handfuls of it, right? But as you watch them develop, watching them get to the point where they can pick up one Cheerio is very cool. It's a major, major milestone, but parents are so excited about looking for walking, they don't know that a pincer grasp is huge. It's huge because that's what makes you different from a lemur. Right? Lemurs have thumbs, but it's not opposable. Okay? So being able to do a pincer grasp is massive. It's a major milestone in your development as a human, as opposed to a monkey. So a pincer grasp occurs somewhere around 9 to 10 months and is a major, major motor milestone. Letting go of the raisin, that takes quite a bit longer. We're looking at closer to 18 months before the letting go bit happens. Right? So it takes a while to go the other way. So this type of grip development we see, it's just that the timing isn't always accurate because it depends on what you're giving them. Right? I don't see this if the toy I give them is this big. Right? I see this. So you've got to be a little bit careful. So as you're reading through this information, think about, because again, you're adults, you're highly skilled. Okay? You don't think about writing, you just write. But what do you do with your hand and your fingers and your elbow when you do these things? Okay? This weekend at home, pay attention to how do I pick up a really hot cup of coffee? Do I pick up a hot cup of coffee the same way I pick up a bottle of cold water? Right? I bet you don't. I bet you don't. Right? So think about it, right? Really think, what did I do with my hand? Where was I looking? Because vision is very, very important when we're looking at reaching and grasping. If I can't see the thing I'm trying to reach and grasp for, how do I behave? It's not the same. Right? If you get up in the middle of the night and you don't turn the lights on in your house, how do you pick up the glass of water by the side of your bed versus what you do during the day? Right? Think about it. You've got to start thinking about it because you do this all the time. But you don't do it consciously. You're not cognitively aware of the changes that you are doing in your behavior because you're just so good at it. You are. Right? So when we look at those sequences then, one of the things that we find is that actually the thing that dictates which shape of hand you see is more to do with the relative size of the object you're picking up in relation to your hand than it is to do with age. So more recently, it's not that the idea is wrong, it's just that the developmental trend is driven by the size of the thing I'm picking up. If I'm picking up even this, right? If it's empty, I'll do it with one hand. But once you guys have put all your binders in here, I'm not going to be picking it up with one hand and walking out. I'm going to use two hands. Okay? So we change what we do based upon the size of the thing or the weight of the thing or our understanding of the object. So cognition of the object I'm picking up sometimes changes what we do. So we need a lot more research on, if that's the case, then what is really developmentally appropriate? What are we most likely to see with these young children? So ratio, this hand size to object size also dictates when you switch from one hand to two hands. Okay? So think about good place to be in the front. Pick up the tennis ball for me. Pick up the... What did he do? Use both hands. Right? Is he strong enough to pick this up with one hand? Hands aren't big enough. Right? He could be. Oh! Trayvon! Ooh, ouch! Whoa! Alright? So it's not always the weight of the object that dictates my behavior. The size of the object is pretty consistent, actually, with that transition. So whether I'm looking at young children or I'm looking at an adult, the ratio, the point at which we transition from 1 to 2 is consistent across age. Right? So grasping and reaching are initially separate. What drives an infant from random arm movements to purposeful reaching? Why do we put mobiles over a baby's crib? Why do you give them soft toys and put them just outside their reach? Because their inquisitiveness to touch the object, they have to reach. That's why you should not, do not be the parent that gives the baby every toy they want. Don't do that. You are not helping them. They have to move to get the toy. Right? And if they're not at the point where they can physically locomote, you still don't want to put the toys within reach, because otherwise they don't learn to reach. Right? They'll learn, but they're going to be delayed. Why do that? Just put the toy out. Make them go further for it. Okay. An interesting question becomes, when the brain and the individual is learning to reach, is that to do with matching where my hand and the object are spatially in relation to each other, or do I have to learn to control the arm, or is it a combination? Which one is more important? So we need more information about reaching in young children, and I think, right, reaching the other end of the lifespan, because if I'm standing up and I reach, that often causes me to lose my balance. So reaching is quite often the reason an elderly person falls over. About 3 to 4 months, they'll be moving. Remember, initially what we're seeing is those stereotypies, reflexes, things that are not voluntary movement. We will start to see deliberate voluntary movement, and they'll consistently move their hand towards their mouth. Okay? By 5 months then, they open the mouth as the hand is moving, right? So earlier than that, if they've got something in their hand, they move their hand to their mouth, and then they start chewing on it. Because you know they're going to chew, they chew on everything, right? By 5 months, the mouth is opening as the hand is on its way. So they're anticipating where the hand is going to end up. But close your eyes. Put your hand out. Touch your nose with your finger. Okay. Okay. Did you know where your nose was? Okay. So you were able to anticipate what the hand was doing in order for it to touch your nose. So this gives us the evidence that the brain is starting to anticipate the movement of the arm. The brain knows where the arm is going to end up because it's able to open the mouth first before the hand gets there, rather than just, right? So, early on we see babies reach for an object with 2 hands. The brain likes to move bilaterally because that means both sides of the brain are doing the same thing with those heavy things that are sticking out from my body, right? That's much easier than trying to just move one side, right? Much easier to move 2. So we see 2 arms. If you have a toy and they want the toy, they'll reach for the toy with both arms. By 4 months, they'll reach with both arms, but they'll only grab for it with one hand. So as they get older, they get better at this uncoupling, we use that term, uncoupling of left and right hemispheres of the brain. And by a year old, they're getting pretty good at doing one or the other, whichever is the most appropriate. By 12 months, I'm able to pull apart and put together. That means I'm working both sides of the brain, both these limbs, in partnership with each other. So we see a lot of those toys where they're sticking shapes in a hole, or Velcro-y type soft toys where they have to pull the arm off the body, right? Or they can pull the head off the toy and then they can stick it back, right? So there's lots of toys for 1-year-olds that involve this action because the development of toys is driven by the research on the development of movement. Right? Otherwise, no one would buy the toys because the child wouldn't play with them. So toy development is driven by motor development. After they've gone through that first birthday, during that next year, they'll start to use objects as tools. So they might start banging a drum. Or they might start, I don't know, banging's the most typical one. So don't buy expensive drums. Give them a wooden spoon and an old battered can. Works just, they don't care. All they want to do is the bang, right? So, a year and a half, we start to see cooperation between the hands, and by the second birthday, we might see complementary things. So one hand does one thing, the other hand does something else to help it, right? So, squeezing a squeezing a tube of toothpaste. Right? How do I do that? I put it down and squeeze it with my elbow. Right? One hand is doing one thing, the other hand is doing something else. From a motor motor control perspective, that's massive. Because my right brain is doing one thing with my left hand, my left brain is doing something else with my right hand. It's huge. So, brushing your teeth in the morning, or at least getting the toothpaste onto the toothbrush in the morning. Right? What else do you do that involves complementary use of hands? Right? How many of you cook with eggs? Right? So you've got to crack the egg, right? So one hand might be the cracking and the other hand might be the whisking. Or you might have, if you're me, because I'm hopeless at cracking eggs, right, bang the egg on the bowl and then use both hands to pull the egg apart. Right? Watch my sister cook, she just goes, and she's whisking away with the other hand. That's not happening in my world. Right? So, how often, what do you really see happen? We don't even have to look at sports skills, just in your life at home. In sports skills, we've got all kinds of instances where we're doing different things with different hands, or where, you know, one hand is supporting the other hand to achieve the task. I don't hit a baseball with one hand. I have two hands on the bat. But they're doing different things. One arm is, I know at least in tennis, I'm assuming it's the same in baseball. If I play a two-handed backhand, right? I'm right-handed, I play a right-handed forehand, but if I play a two-handed backhand, my left hand is doing a lot of work on the racket. My right hand is guiding, my left hand is pushing and adding force on the racket. Complementary actions. And remember when we were talking about locomotion, I said that, you know, once they're sitting upright, reaching and grasping, you start to see big changes in reaching and grasping. So, again, you can hold them upright and give them things to reach and grasp for. That will aid their development. Right? Once they're upright on their own, then we see quite big jumps in the development of reaching and grasping. Those bum scooters tend to be very advanced in reaching and grasping because their hands are free all the time. The kids that creep, a little bit behind, but it doesn't matter. It's not like a year. It's just a week. So what postural constraints could serve as rate limiters to the development of reaching? Plus be thinking, what postural constraints, remember rate limiters when we go to the other end of the lifespan, rate limiters are the system that is deteriorating to the point where the skill can't occur well anymore. Right? So at the one end, it's the system that's slow to develop, that holds back the skill, and at the other end, it's the system that's deteriorating first, that impacts whether the skill can occur. So what postural constraints could impact reaching? Because for me, especially since my nan fell and broke her hip, that's interesting to me, right? So the strength of my legs, the ability to pull my center of gravity back within my base of support, right? Suppleness, so that I can reach without moving my center of gravity outside my base of support. Do I have to do this, or can I just do that? Okay. What things impact, what are the constraints? Particularly in this example, we're looking at structural constraints. You could have some functional constraints, but structural ones, be thinking about structural constraints. Manual performance, so we're looking at fine motor skills. Start to decline after the age of 50. Right? We test fine motor skills with finger tapping. Okay? So finger tapping, so just this skill. That's a fine motor skill. Someone who's very, very good at fine motor skills will have very rapid finger tapping. Someone who's less good at fine motor skills, that finger tapping tends to be slow. Either way, it gets slower after the age of 50. And coordination scores, when we look at coordination, tend to go down. So part of that could be because strength is declining. Some of it is might be to do with the nervous system, although probably not at 50, that would be older. Right? If you look at, so if you have an example of your grandmother's handwriting, you guys are what, early 20s. So if you have an example of your grandmother's handwriting from a birthday card in your late teens, sorry, that was insensitive. And then look at a example in another 10 years' time. What do you see happen with the handwriting? Right? You're going to see the handwriting get lighter, it's going to be a little shaky, it's going to look, right? The overall signature, the overall shape of the writing won't change. Handwriting is very stable, but the coordination, the control of the handwriting changes. Okay, rapid aiming movements. So I have to initiate the movement. I've got to get a limb, remember our something that's at rest stays at rest unless we apply a force. So I have to move the arm, I have to accelerate the arm, and then I've got to decelerate it and I've got to stop it. That's even trickier. When we look at skills that involve that kind of action in your age group, the acceleration and the deceleration, the start and the stop are pretty equal. It looks like a normative curve. Okay. If I look at those types of skills in an older population, then what we see is the acceleration phase does not last for as long. Right? And so the deceleration phase of the skill is longer. It starts to get harder for the brain to slow the thing down that it got moving. Well, and stop it. You have to apply a lot of force to stop something. So, catching. We want to catch objects with our hands, typically, right? And so in order to catch it, I have to intercept it. That means my brain has to know where it's going, and I have to know where to put my hand to put it in the way of the thing it's trying to catch. Early catching we've already discussed, we don't see interception. They're just standing there waiting for the ball to hit them, and sometimes they'll move their head, shut their eyes, because the brain can't cope with that amount of information coming from the moving ball. As we get better, we start to use our hands, not our arms, and we want to be able to give. Right? So I've got to time hitting. So when the ball is coming through the air, I have to put my hand in the right place. If my hand is rigid, what happens to the ball? Bounces back out again, right? So the ball's going to hit my hand. I've got to give, allow the force absorption, and I've got to shut my fingers. Otherwise the ball isn't in my hand. There's a lot of coordination involved in catching a ball. Catching is way harder than throwing. Right? So when you're looking at your developmental sequences, kids are going to score high on throwing and horrible on catching. Catching takes a long time. And we don't, because that's the developmental change. Right, we want to look at the interception. How hard is it to catch a ball? Catching is much more difficult. So I'm going to lose it earlier as an elderly adult, and it takes much more practice when I'm young. And you're going to meet adults who cannot catch. Right? Without a lot of practice, catching does not just develop. Right? So I need a lot of practice. What kind of ball do I give someone to practice catching? Well, it depends what it is I'm trying to achieve. Right? If I want them to catch a ball in one hand, there would be no point in giving them a slow-mo or a basketball. If what I want is they're scared of standing in front of the ball, I don't want to throw a tennis ball at them. I just want them to learn where the ball is in the air. I'm going to use a slow-mo, so you have to pick the right equipment for what it is you're trying to achieve as you're teaching the catching skill. If I'm assessing catching, then remember I've got to keep everything consistent. I don't want to use a big ball at the beginning of the semester and a small ball at the end of the semester. As Colton said when we were discussing the MSU chart, can I use the small ball at the beginning and let them score very badly, and then let them score well at the end after we've worked on catching? Yes. Right? If you're working with a 3-year-old, even if you use a big ball, they're going to score poorly on catching. Right? So it depends on your population. Am I going to score the outcome? Right? So, number of catches in a set of attempts. I throw the ball to you 10 times, you caught it 3 times. Outcomes, product. Or am I going to assess the process? What are you doing while you're trying to catch the ball? Do a process. It's up to you. Right? Who are you working with? Why are you assessing them? If I'm assessing my bass player in softball or baseball, it's probably pretty important that they catch the ball 9 or 10 out of 10 times. So the product assessment might be appropriate, right? Because it doesn't matter how gorgeous they look while they're trying to catch the ball. If the ball is on the floor, we lost the game. So this is not helpful, right? So I'm not saying I don't personally like product assessments, but I don't do anything with competitive sport anymore on purpose, right? Because I don't like product. So I'm not saying that a product assessment is wrong. I'm saying you have to use it in the appropriate place. If I am working with middle school children, do I want to count how many times they catch the ball, or do I want to help them catch the ball? Right? So use the appropriate assessment at the appropriate time with the developmentally appropriate population. So, think about a model of constraints, because it always is a useful tool. Right? What are we catching? If I change the object that I'm throwing or I'm projecting, then I've changed the task. If I've changed the task, I expect to see a different movement pattern. So, what am I throwing might make a difference to what I'm seeing. All right, we're gonna have to finish anticipation Tuesday before we start our review, okay? Because I don't want to leave you to do anticipation on your own. So on Tuesday, come ready, we will finish this information from chapter 9. We will take a bit of a break, and then we will do our review work. Okay? Put your binders in the crate, please.
Do we get a second crack at that question?
Oh, good job. Well done, Evan. Excellent. You do want a good point. They add up. It's like 10% of your brain.